Revenge Diaries with I.M.
I watched the promotion email land in my inbox, and for a moment, I thought the world had gone completely insane. 15 years of loyalty, 15 years of blood, sweat, and late nights, and it all vanished in a single digital notification. My name is Lucas Hayes, and for the past decade and a half, venture tech wasn't just my workplace, it was my life. I'd started as an eager junior engineer, stayed up nights debugging code nobody else wanted to touch, and consistently delivered results that kept the company ahead of its competitors. My work ethic wasn't just recognized, it was celebrated. Or at least I thought it was. Then came Kendra Blake, the CEO's younger sister. I'd always known she had charm, the kind that made people forgive mistakes and overlook incompetence. But she was supposed to be in marketing, managing events and client relations, not climbing the corporate ladder with zero experience in technology. And yet, there it was in black and white. Congratulations, Kendra Blake, promoted to Senior Project Director. My heart pounded, a mix of disbelief and anger. This wasn't just nepotism, it was a slap in the face. All those times I had stayed late to finalize the Helix project, all the innovations that had put venture tech on the map, and now my boss, my so-called mentor, Richard Hayes, who had promised me this next step for years, handed the role to his sister. The nepotistic leapfrogging left me speechless. Richard. My boss, my guide, my confidant in the corporate battlefield. Or so I thought. For years he had been my ally, giving me subtle nods of approval in meetings, trusting me with critical assignments. But now, I realized those approving nods may have been nothing more than a distraction. A way to keep me loyal while someone entirely unqualified stepped into my future. I remembered the countless lunch meetings we had, just the two of us, where he'd pat my shoulder and talk about how I'd be running major divisions soon. I had trusted him. I had believed him. And yet, here was proof that he valued family ties over dedication. I glanced at Kendra's photo on the corporate intranet. A bright smile, freshly minted title, and zero track record. She waved at the camera, oblivious to the storm she had just walked into. My gut twisted. It wasn't just anger that surged through me, it was unease. Something about the way Richard had orchestrated this, so subtly and efficiently, made me wonder if I had missed warning signs all along. I replayed the past few months in my mind. The last meeting Richard called, the casual remarks about family stepping up. The way Kendra suddenly started shadowing me in my projects. Every interaction now seemed like a calculated maneuver rather than happenstance. The betrayal was deeper than I had imagined. Personal, professional, and meticulously planned. And as I sat there, staring at my empty inbox and Kendra's smug grin, a chilling thought crossed my mind. This wasn't just about a promotion. It was a message. A test. And I was the one who had failed without even realizing it. Something in my chest tightened. The calm of the office, the familiar hum of computers and fluorescent lights, suddenly felt suffocating. The world hadn't gone insane. No worse, it had revealed its true face. And I was about to learn just how dangerous loyalty could be. I told myself it was just a rough day. Maybe I had misread the situation. After 15 years of loyal service, surely my work still spoke for itself. Surely. But the cracks were beginning to show, and they weren't easy to ignore. It started small, almost imperceptibly. Tasks I had been trusted with for years, projects I had managed from inception to completion, were suddenly being shared with Kendra. At first, it seemed like collaboration, the kind companies encourage. But the more I observed, the more the pattern became impossible to dismiss. Reports I had drafted meticulously were now being edited by her. Presentations I had spent late nights perfecting were reassigned to her name for experience. And she began attending meetings I had scheduled as lead. I remember the first moment it truly stung. I walked into a project meeting I had organized for weeks, only to find Kendra standing at the front, confidently explaining strategies I had drafted. She smiled at me, but there was something in that smile, an ease of possession, that didn't belong. Richard sat nearby, nodding approvingly. I froze, my coffee cooling in my hands. This wasn't collaboration. This was appropriation. Then came the secret calls. I began noticing her slipping out of the office more than usual. At first, I didn't think much of it. People have lives outside work, right? But the frequency, the timing, it was suspicious. She'd return, quickly hang up her phone, pretending nothing had happened, but her subtle smirk betrayed her. A week later, I overheard snippets of her whispered conversation while passing her desk, mentions of projects, resources, and approval, always followed by laughter. I couldn't piece it together, but my gut screamed that she wasn't just coordinating with clients. Money and resources too were bending in her favor. Budgets that had been tight for years in my department were suddenly being expanded for her initiatives. Requests I had submitted weeks prior were denied without explanation, while Kendra's proposals, some far less developed, were greenlit almost instantly. At first, I chalked it up to oversight or the natural flow of corporate resource allocation. But then came the patterns. Every expense approved, every tool purchased, every developer reassigned seemed to favor her growth and subtly diminish mine. The lies came next, small and seemingly insignificant at first, but cumulative enough to create doubt in every interaction. Deadlines were shifted without notice, emails disappeared from shared inboxes, and information critical to projects was mysteriously withheld. Every time I confronted Richard about it, he brushed me off lightly, his tone calm, reassuring. "Lucas, she's just learning," he'd say. Or, "I wanted to give her exposure." Exposure. That word became a knife twisting in my chest. Was he really protecting her, or was he setting me up? The favoritism extended beyond tasks and resources. Socially, too, it became obvious. Team members I had mentored for years now hesitated when taking directions from me if Kendra was present. Her charisma, effortless, practiced, made people defer to her, laugh at her jokes, and overlook her mistakes. I watched, silently simmering, as my authority subtly eroded in ways I didn't yet fully understand. And the emotional strain, it was relentless. I couldn't sleep. I woke in the middle of the night, reviewing my day in painful detail. Every conversation with Richard, every glance exchanged with Kendra, every email I hadn't been CC'd on, I dissected it endlessly. Doubt not at me. Was I imagining things? Was I overreacting, letting my emotions cloud my judgment? And yet, something inside me told me I wasn't wrong. Something in the way Kendra maneuvered, and in the way Richard subtly steered the office dynamic, felt deliberate. I began avoiding unnecessary interactions, keeping my head down while my mind raced. I replayed every moment of the last few months. The casual remarks Richard had made about family stepping up, the way Kendra suddenly became involved in projects I was leading, the way certain decisions were consulted with her first. It all pointed to something, but I couldn't see the whole picture yet. The betrayal was hidden in plain sight, wrapped in the guise of corporate necessity and familial loyalty. There was one particularly troubling incident that cemented my unease. A budget for a critical software upgrade had been approved weeks ago for my department. I had planned the rollout meticulously, coordinating developers, scheduling testing phases, and mapping deadlines. On the day of implementation, I arrived to find Kendra already at the server room, laptop open, talking animatedly to the team. She had changed the configuration, overridden my deployment plan, and presented her approach as the final version. Richard had been there too, silently observing, smiling faintly. I felt my chest tighten, a mix of fury and helplessness. Walking back to my office, I realized the truth. My 15 years of dedication were being undermined systematically, but I didn't yet have proof. Richard's involvement, Kendra's ambition, the subtle manipulations, all suggested betrayal but nothing concrete. And that uncertainty, that gnawing doubt, was worse than any confirmed lie. It made me second-guess every interaction, every decision, every thought. As I sat at my desk staring at the blinking cursor on my unfinished report, the office around me buzzing as usual, I felt something I hadn't felt in years: fear. Not of losing a project or even a promotion. Fear of what my so-called allies were capable of, and fear of what I didn't yet know. The subtle cracks in my world were widening, and I knew deep down that whatever was coming next wouldn't just test my skills. It would test my resolve, my patience, and my very sense of loyalty. Something had shifted. The office, once familiar and comforting, now felt like a maze of deception. And somewhere in that maze were Kendra and Richard, smiling, maneuvering, hiding the truth behind words, titles, and the weight of family ties. I clenched my fists. I didn't know the full extent of the betrayal yet. But I knew one thing. I wasn't going down without seeing the truth. It started with a file. A single, unassuming PDF buried deep in the company's shared server. I had been searching for missing budget approvals when I stumbled across it, almost by accident. The header read, Project Helix Resource and Promotion Allocation. At first, I thought it was just another report, the kind I had compiled dozens of times. But as I scrolled, my chest tightened. Numbers, emails, internal notes, all carefully logged, painted a picture so deliberate it made my hands shake. Every major milestone I had achieved, every innovative idea I had brought to the table, every long night coding the Helix project, had been quietly reallocated to someone else. And that someone wasn't just any colleague. It was Kendra Blake. My work, my leadership, my accomplishments, all handed to her under Richard's directive. I sank into my chair. Disbelief. Anger. Heartbreak. 15 years of loyalty, 15 years of trust, and my boss, the man I had considered a mentor, had engineered a coup right under my nose. The promotion that had landed in my inbox? Kendra hadn't earned it. I had. Richard had signed off to give her the title and recognition, justifying it under the guise of family development. But the documents told the truth. My achievements were reassigned, my credit erased, and my future handed to someone who had merely smiled in the right direction at the right time. I stared at the screen, my vision blurring. It felt like the floor had dropped beneath me. Every email I had sent, every meeting I had led, every report I had submitted, it had been siphoned, repackaged, and presented as her work. My 15 years of dedication reduced to digital breadcrumbs she could claim at a whim. And Richard had known. He had orchestrated it meticulously, ensuring no one would notice the deception until it was too late. Rage flared hot in my chest, but it was laced with disbelief. How could someone I had trusted so completely betray me so thoroughly? The man who had once patted me on the shoulder and called me the backbone of this company had willingly sacrificed my career for family loyalty. And the worst part, Kendra didn't even seem aware of the devastation she was causing. She smiled, she took meetings, she laughed in hallways, blissfully unaware, or perhaps deliberately naive. I leaned back, trying to steady my breathing. Anger pulsed in waves, threatening to consume me. I wanted to storm into Richard's office, shout, demand answers. But something told me to hold back. Rage alone wouldn't fix this. I needed strategy. I needed proof. And I needed patience. The betrayal wasn't just professional. It was personal. I had given this company everything. My time, my energy, my loyalty. I had stayed late nights, worked weekends, and sacrificed relationships for the success of Project Helix. And in return, I was replaced by someone who hadn't earned a fraction of what I had achieved. Every recognition I had been promised, every opportunity to lead had been stolen. And the pain, the sense of being invisible in a place I had built, was suffocating. I closed the laptop and stared out the window at the city skyline. The lights shimmered, oblivious to my personal disaster. The office, once a sanctuary of my ambitions, now felt like a cage. Every corner, every desk, every familiar hum of the servers reminded me of what I had lost. It wasn't just a promotion. It was 15 years of my life, handed to someone else as though it meant nothing. Sleep became impossible. At night, I replayed every interaction with Richard and Kendra, analyzing every word, every gesture, every glance. Moments that had seemed inconsequential now screamed of manipulation. Kendra's presence in my meetings, her sudden involvement in my projects, Richard's approving nods at her work, all part of a plan I hadn't noticed until now. The betrayal was systematic, calculated, and cruel. I couldn't confront them yet, not without risk. If I acted impulsively, I could destroy any chance of reclaiming what was mine. And yet, the desire for revenge burned hotter with every passing hour. I wanted to expose them, to make them feel the humiliation and rage they had inflicted on me. But more than that, I wanted to reclaim my life, my career, and my dignity. And then came the thought that chilled me even more. What if this wasn't the end? What if Richard's manipulation extended further than I could see? What if every ally I thought I had in the company had been influenced, subtly steered to overlook Kendra and undervalue me? The idea of a conspiracy, hidden in plain sight, not at my sanity. But even in despair, one thing was certain. I would not accept this quietly. 15 years of loyalty had taught me one thing: patience, resilience, and strategy. I didn't yet have the full map of their betrayal, but I had discovered enough to know the truth. Kendra had stolen my role. Richard had handed it to her. And they thought I would simply watch, powerless, as my career was dismantled. I clenched my fists, jaw tight, eyes fixed on the dark city beyond the office window. This wasn't just about revenge, it was about justice. And I would find a way to take it. Step by step, plan by plan, I would turn their deception against them. But for now I waited. Watched. Calculated. Because the difference between a furious outburst and a precise strike could mean the difference between reclaiming everything or losing it all forever. The first step had been taken. I knew the betrayal. And that knowledge, painful as it was, became my weapon. For days, I sat in a haze of anger and disbelief. The betrayal I had uncovered consumed me. Every waking moment was a replay of Richard's smug expressions and Kendra's effortless charm as she claimed what was rightfully mine. I felt hollowed out, my sense of purpose corroded by 15 years of loyalty thrown aside. But then something happened. Something small, almost mundane, but it struck me with the force of a revelation. I was walking past the office cafeteria, coffee in hand, when I overheard two junior developers discussing the upcoming Helix project presentation. They were nervously talking about how much of the work they had done, work I had guided, was now being credited to Kendra. One of them, timid and young, said, "I hope she actually understands the code. I mean, she's barely touched it." And in that moment, anger shifted. Pain turned into clarity. The betrayal was real, yes, but it wasn't the end. I had built something bigger than a title, bigger than recognition, bigger than favoritism. Project Helix was mine, and my work spoke louder than any promotion Kendra could claim. I realized then that I had a choice. I could let this betrayal define me, swallow me, and watch as my efforts were erased, or I could fight back strategically, intelligently, and without letting my emotions sabotage me. The fire in my chest, once raw and chaotic, began to organize itself into something disciplined. I wouldn't just react, I would reclaim everything that was mine piece by piece. That night, I sat at my desk long after the office had emptied. The glow of the monitor highlighted the lines of fatigue etched into my face, but my mind was sharp, laser-focused. I started writing down everything I knew. Dates, projects, budget reallocations, meetings, secret calls. I cataloged every instance of favoritism, every subtle lie, every shift of resources from me to Kendra. The betrayal wasn't just personal, it was methodical. And methodical actions could be undone by methodical strategy. The turning point came when I found a single, overlooked email buried in the server. A note from Richard to Kendra, explicitly instructing her on how to navigate the upcoming audit to ensure her work appeared superior to mine. My pulse raced as I read it. It was concrete, undeniable proof of collusion. The betrayal was no longer abstract, it was documented. And suddenly the helplessness that had gripped me vanished, replaced by a cold, determined clarity. I leaned back in my chair, eyes scanning the empty office. I remembered the long nights I had spent troubleshooting, the projects I had carried almost single-handedly, the innovations I had pioneered. Each memory fueled my resolve. This wasn't just about revenge. This was about justice, about proving that dedication and talent could not be erased by nepotism and deceit. The emotional transformation wasn't instant, it was a gradual, visceral process. I felt the hurt, the heartbreak, and the rage, but instead of letting it consume me, I harnessed it. Every betrayal, every slight, became fuel for my plan. I began to see Kendra's smug confidence not as a threat, but as an opportunity. If she had overstepped without knowledge or competence, I could use her own missteps against her. If Richard thought I was defeated, he had underestimated the patience and precision that 15 years of loyalty had instilled in me. By the end of the night, I had a preliminary plan forming in my mind. First, I would gather evidence. Every email, every budget sheet, every meeting note that showed their manipulations. Then I would subtly test Kendra, applying pressure to see how she handled real accountability. Finally, I would confront Richard not in anger but armed with facts and strategy, exposing the depth of his betrayal in a way he could not ignore. I felt a surge of adrenaline, the kind that comes not from fear but from purpose. The helplessness I had endured for days had dissolved into inner strength, a quiet but unbreakable resolve. I was no longer the betrayed employee, the victim of favoritism and deceit. I was Lucas Hayes, a man wronged, yes, but armed with knowledge, skill, and the determination to reclaim what was his. Sleep came later that night, but it was a sleep unburdened by despair. In my dreams, I rehearsed meetings, imagined scenarios, tested strategies. I saw Kendra faltering under pressure, Richard flinching under scrutiny, and most importantly, I saw myself standing tall, vindicated, unstoppable. The fire that had once consumed me from the inside was now a tool, a precise, controlled force that would drive every action I took. The next morning, I walked into the office with a renewed focus. My colleagues noticed the difference immediately. There was a quiet confidence in the way I moved, a calm intensity in my eyes. Kendra greeted me with her usual bright smile, but I barely acknowledged it. Richard gave me a nod in passing, and I returned it with measured professionalism, hiding the storm brewing beneath the surface. I had crossed a line, from despair to determination, from passive victim to active strategist. The betrayal that had once shattered me was now the very thing sharpening my resolve. Every step I would take from this point forward would be deliberate, every move calculated, every action aimed at reclaiming what was rightfully mine. This wasn't revenge yet. It wasn't even confrontation. It was preparation, the transformation from hurt to strength. But it was enough. It was the first step on the path that would eventually topple the arrogance and deception that had stolen 15 years of my life. And deep inside, a cold, focused thought settled like steel. They think I'm broken. They have no idea I've only just begun. I didn't make a dramatic show of it. Revenge isn't a movie montage, at least not one that wins. It's paperwork, patience, and patience again. It's watching, documenting, and waiting for the perfect collapse. Over the next week, I turned my hurt into a plan with cold surgical precision. Every move was measured, each step designed to expose what Richard and Kendra had tried so carefully to hide. I built a private timeline. Every email, every meeting invite, every resource request that had been redirected. Everything I'd cataloged in the dark hours became a line on that timeline. I created backups on encrypted drives, copied logs from servers, saved timestamps, and pulled old version histories for code and documents. If Kendra had repackaged my work, version control would show who wrote what and when. If Richard had instructed her how to manipulate audits, I would find the trail. I spent long nights cross-referencing commit histories with meeting notes until patterns emerged like constellations. No one wants to be the whistleblower without allies. I started speaking to people discreetly, quiet one-on-ones with developers I trusted, a lunch with an old colleague from operations who owed me favors, and a careful conversation with a contract accountant who kept meticulous records. I didn't accuse. I asked questions, nudged memories, and let their answers fill gaps. The junior dev who had muttered in the cafeteria became a crucial thread. He remembered a commit message that referenced my original module but credited to KB integration. The accountant confirmed odd budget line items that matched Kendra's suddenly expanded scope. Each corroboration made the plan less fragile. If Kendra was incompetent and riding on nepotism, she would crack under real accountability. I planned tests disguised as routine reviews, code walkthroughs, client-facing rehearsal sessions, and impromptu technical Q&As. I volunteered to lead these reviews under the pretense of mentoring her through the transition. In private, I crafted questions that would reveal whether she truly understood the architecture, or was parroting phrases she'd been coached to use. I watched her in meetings like a surgeon watching a patient under anesthesia, waiting for the involuntary twitch. The best traps are obvious to everyone but the prey. I seeded subtle technical challenges into the staging environment, edge cases only the original architect would foresee. I rearranged deployment tasks to see who would handle rollback procedures correctly. When Kendra took the lead on one of these staged rollouts, her responses were patchy, and she deferred to others in ways that left traces. Each misstep was recorded. Each hesitation became evidence of superficial competence. Meanwhile, I kept the most damning document, Richard's directive email, safely offline, ready to be revealed at the decisive moment. Accusations without story evaporate. I began drafting an internal report that told the truth. Timelines, commit histories, budget anomalies, and eyewitness notes. I kept it factual, clinical, no venom, just verifiable facts with timestamps and attachments. I created 2 versions, one for a confidential board-level submission, and a lighter one to seed with trusted colleagues, so the social proof built quietly. If the board smelled a pattern and employees murmured doubts, the house of cards would lean before it toppled. Through it all, Kendra and Richard stayed strutting in their performance, blissfully confident. Richard's face in the corridor was the same mild, avuncular mask he wore before. He still praised Kendra openly at town halls, smiling like a proud father. Kendra's laugh rang in meetings. She posted cheerful photos with clients on the company feed. Their public control made my work harder. It meant I was fighting optics as much as facts. They had positioned themselves as the story, and I had to tilt attention back to the truth. Emotionally, the process was an acid bath. Every time I saw Kendra triumph in the spotlight, accepting praise for a demo I'd engineered, cutting ribbons on initiatives I'd launched, I felt old wounds open. But then I'd return to my timeline or a commit diff and let the cold data soothe me. The anger was still there, a simmering engine, but the panic had been replaced by focus. Each corroborating ledger and hesitant answer were fuel. Week by week the tension escalated. I planted the first seeds of doubt with one trusted manager who had a soft spot for fair play. I leaked a well-constructed question about a deployment to another team lead, watching the rumor bloom into concern. The company grapevine, which had once only whispered compliments about Kendra, now carried tentative questions. Yet in public, Richard continued to smile. That was worst of all. His calm convinced senior leaders there was nothing to see. I felt the stakes like a current underfoot. Exposed too early and be dismissed as a bitter veteran. Wait too long and the evidence could be buried or altered. Timing would be everything. My plan depended on creating a moment when the board needed clarity. An upcoming external audit, and a demo with a major client supplied the perfect stage. If Kendra faltered under real scrutiny during the client demo, and the audit flagged discrepancies in resource allocation, the board's complacency could snap. On the evening before the demo, I sat alone in the conference room with my report open. The city lights blinked beyond the glass, indifferent. My fingers hovered over the keyboard, not because I doubted my findings, but because I understood what unveiling them would do. Careers would be ruined. Families would be dragged into the mess. The calculus of justice and collateral damage sat heavy on me. I had crossed from planning into execution and could not walk back. The trap was set, the pieces arranged. Kendra and Richard still believed they held all the cards. They didn't know that the narrative had shifted, silently, meticulously, inexorably, into my hands. The next morning the demo would go live. The audit window would open. I would watch from the wings as they performed, and then one way or another, the truth would have to answer for itself. The demo room smelled of disinfectant and stale coffee. Lights focused on the stage like interrogation lamps. Outside, the client delegation, VCs, CTOs, and a reporter who'd been invited as a friendly observer, filed into rows of chairs. Upstairs in the boardroom, the audit team had already begun its review. I felt each breath like a drumbeat. Steady, inevitable. Kendra was radiant in the spotlight, all practiced smiles and polished phrases. Richard sat behind her, chest broad with that calm paternal pride that had kept him untouchable for years. They had staged the narrative perfectly. The family stewarding the future of venture tech. To most people it was tidy, believable, and tragically unassailable. I sat in the back, laptop closed, heartbeat loud enough to drown out the presenter's voice. My report waited on a flash drive in my pocket. Commit diffs, timestamps, budget worksheets, the directive email from Richard. I had rehearsed every line in my head, every slow reveal mapped like choreography. This was not about theatrics. It was about incontrovertible facts delivered at the exact moment their story relied on optics the most. The demo began. Kendra walked through slides, narrated features with a confident cadence that had fooled so many meetings ago. The client's CTO nodded rhythmically. The product worked on the surface because I had built the core systems that made it run. But I'd seeded flaws in the staging environment. An obscure concurrency bug, an edge case race condition, a mismarked migration script. I watched Kendra field a live question about rollback procedures and saw her tighten. She fumbled, reciting talking points she couldn't translate to technical failure modes. The CTO's brow furrowed. At that instant, I triggered the first domino. I slipped quietly to the demo engineer, whispered a single sentence, "Run the rollback test now." He hesitated, then executed. The screen stuttered. The app threw the error I'd scripted. A hush rippled through the room. The reporter leaned forward, pen poised. Kendra's smile flickered, then forced itself back. She tried to shoehorn an answer, surface level, confident sounding, but the CTO's follow-up was surgical, asking for the exact sequence and logs. She could not produce them. Behind me, a murmur started like wine through dry leaves. I downloaded the live logs to my laptop, then fed the boardroom with my lightweight report, careful, curated, through a colleague I'd trusted. The client's doubts grew teeth. They asked for the architecture walkthrough. That was the pressure point I'd been waiting for. While Kendra scrambled on stage, I moved. I handed the audit team a folder containing the chain of custody, time-stamped commits, email directives, budget reallocations, and the incriminating note from Richard instructing Kendra on how to frame the audit outcomes. The senior auditor, a woman with a face like a ledger, skimmed and then looked up slowly, her expression changing from professional curiosity to cold comprehension. The room constricted. Richard's smile faltered. Kendra's eyes widened in a way that no amount of practiced charm could hide. Caught between fear and the sudden, dawning realization that the scaffolding beneath her performance was crumbling. The auditor spoke first, voice flat and precise. These documents show deliberate misattribution of work, budget manipulation, and directives that imply intentional obfuscation of project authorship. Her words landed like gavel strikes. The client team exchanged looks and, with a few curt questions, excused themselves to consult privately. Cameras, smartphones first, then the company's own PR rep trying to keep things contained, pivoted. Richard tried to intercede. He rose slowly, palms open, a rehearsed display of reason. "These are misunderstandings, organizational transitions," he began. I walked to the front of the room. Not to shout. Not to plead. To show. I pulled up the commit history, scrolled to the diffs where my module's author name had been overwritten. I dragged the email thread into view. The one where Richard had coached Kendra on phrasing and proposed budget moves. The text glared at the wall-sized screen. "Ensure audit appears seamless." It read in Richard's own words. "You'll take credit for rollout items. We'll frame it as collaboration." Gasps rustled through the seats. The reporter stopped taking notes and started recording. I felt Richard's eyes knife through me, betrayal turning into a primal fear. Kendra's face had gone pale. The practiced lines of her mask had cracked. The board was summoned immediately. They filtered into a glassed-off conference room. And for the first time I saw doubt in the faces that used to look at me as the company's steady hand. The CEO, older, wary, stared down at the documents on his lap. He'd trusted Richard for years. Now those years were a liability no one wanted to explain to investors or the press. In that hour, power shifted in jagged movements. PR tried to spin the demo failure as technical glitch, but the audit team's findings were clinical and damning. Vendors who had been reassigned from my projects were contacted. Their emails confirmed the pattern. The client called off the partnership discussion pending an internal review. The company's stock, thinly traded but visible, wavered on a rumor the reporter tweeted with a blunt headline that included my name and Richard's. Richard was escorted to a closed-door meeting. I watched him leave, shoulders tight, voice a whisper as he mouthed something to Kendra. She remained in the room, no longer the sunlit figure she'd been. The humiliation poured out in quiet, private ways. An assistant refusing to schedule her next client, colleagues avoiding her eyes, a line manager retracting compliments he'd made hours before. In the public square of the company, silence became the loudest sentence. The board convened an emergency session. They moved fast. Immediate suspension for Richard pending investigation. Kendra placed on administrative leave while authorship and misconduct were examined, and a call to external counsel. Their decisions were surgical, aimed at stabilizing the company and showing decisive governance. For me, the formal vindication felt both hollow and exquisitely cleansing. 19 years of my life, 15 at VentureTech, couldn't be returned, but a reckoning had opened. Outside the glass, The city lights carried on as if indifferent. Inside, there was a different rhythm. Colleagues approaching me with apologies, offers of solidarity, and a few sheepish confessions about having suspected but been too frightened to act. The young developer from the cafeteria found me, hands shaking, and said, "We saw you do the right thing." It was all the thanks I needed. Richard's resignation came 2 days later, officially tendered as mutual separation, but everyone knew the truth. Kendra's leave extended into termination after the audit made clear her role in misattribution and her inability to substantiate technical claims. The client pulled its pilot. Investors asked for briefings. The immediate carnage was substantial, public, and irreversible. I didn't take any gloating photos. There was no triumphant speech. Instead, I sat with the audit lead in a quiet office and walked her through my documentation, step by painstaking step. The work I had done for years finally answered for itself in the language it had always spoken. Timestamps, code, and verifiable records. Justice, in this instance, wore the shape of evidence. That night, as the adrenaline ebbed and the city beyond my window blinked on, I let myself feel the fracture mend. The betrayal had been exposed. The people who had stolen 15 years of my life were stripped of the illusion that had protected them. It wasn't perfect. There would be fallout, lawyers, reputations torn, and wounds that no apology could heal. But the core truth remained. What had been mine had been proved to be mine. I exhaled deeply. The revenge I'd planned had unfolded, calculated, surgical, and public. It had not been a spectacle for spectacle's sake. It had been a reclamation. As the office dimmed around me, I realized something tender and strange. The vindication didn't erase the hurt, but it made room for something else. A small, stubborn ember of possibility, one that might become something new. Outside, a car alarm barked once, lonely and unnecessary. Inside, the company's lights burned on. The game was not over. There would be inquiries, settlements, and reputations to rebuild. But for the first time in months, I slept knowing I had not been erased. I had answered betrayal with truth. And that was enough for now. The office was quieter now. The hum of servers still filled the halls, but the air had shifted. Kendra's desk sat empty, papers stacked and tagged for reassignment. Richard's chair was gone, the space cold and conspicuously bare. 15 years of betrayal had ended. Not with shouting, not with dramatic confrontations, but with clarity, evidence, and the slow, unstoppable erosion of their control. For me, Lucas Hayes, the journey had been exhausting, every nerve stretched tight by disbelief, heartbreak, and rage. But the victory was neither flashy nor instantaneous. It was measured, earned, and undeniable. In the weeks following the exposure, VentureTech began a process of internal restructuring. Leadership positions were reassessed, audits confirmed the depth of Richard and Kendra's manipulations, and policies were put in place to prevent nepotism from ever overshadowing merit again. I returned to my role, not as the employee who had once been sidelined, but as a leader whose work had been proven essential. Colleagues treated me with renewed respect. They had witnessed my composure, my patience, and the precision with which I had reclaimed my career. People approached me quietly, sharing confessions of having suspected the favoritism, but feared speaking up. The weight of validation settled over me in a way that was both humbling and invigorating. 15 years of loyalty had finally been recognized, not with empty titles, but with the truth of my contribution. Richard attempted to salvage his reputation privately, but the board was resolute. Internal memos leaked strategically, detailing his directives and Kendra's mismanagement. His name became synonymous with corporate nepotism and poor judgment in professional circles. Kendra, despite her charm and early confidence, struggled to find a new role. No company wanted an employee with public evidence of misattribution and incompetence. In quiet irony, both Richard and Kendra, who had once wielded their family connections like armor, were left exposed, vulnerable, and professionally diminished. The poetic justice of it was satisfying, cruel, almost cinematic. Even my own personal vindication carried weight beyond the office. I was offered consulting roles, speaking engagements, and invitations to mentor younger engineers. The very people who had overlooked my contributions now sought my insight. I had become both a cautionary tale and an exemplar of resilience. My career wasn't just restored, it was stronger than it had ever been. But the lessons lingered, sharper than any award or title. Betrayal, I realized, leaves scars not just in career trajectories, but in trust, confidence, and emotional balance. 15 years of dedication had been tested in ways I could never have anticipated. Yet in emerging from the ordeal, I had discovered something vital: the true power of patience, strategy, and self-belief. Anger could be a weapon, yes, but only if wielded with precision. Loyalty, though it had been exploited, had also been my anchor, my guide, and ultimately my advantage. I often replayed the moment the email fell into my hands, the one that revealed Richard's orchestration and Kendra's unearned rise. At the time, it had felt like a final blow. Now, looking back, it had been the spark that ignited the sequence of events that led to justice. The irony was delicious. In attempting to manipulate me, they had inadvertently crafted the very chain that would unseat them. As I settled back into my office one late evening, I stared at the skyline beyond the glass, lights twinkling like a constellation of stories yet untold. I allowed myself a small private smile. 15 years of loyalty, erased, stolen, manipulated, had ultimately returned to me tenfold in the form of vindication, respect, and personal strength. And then, quietly, I whispered a thought that still gives me chills. They thought they could bury me under 15 years of lies, but the truth always digs its way out. Goosebumps rose along my arms as I realized how perfectly poetic that line had become. Not just for them, but for anyone who has ever been betrayed. To those watching this story unfold, I want to ask, have you ever felt the sting of betrayal? The sinking realization that someone you trusted had stolen from you? Be it a promotion, recognition, or something even closer to home. How did you respond? I invite you to share your experiences in the comments below. Your story matters, and your voice may inspire someone else who's navigating their own betrayal. And if you felt the intensity of being wronged, but also the power of patience, strategy, and reclaiming what's yours, subscribe to this channel. Here, we explore stories of justice, revenge, and triumph, and I promise you, the next tale will be just as gripping, just as raw, and just as satisfying. Because the truth, no matter how deeply hidden, always finds its way to the surface. And when it does, poetic justice isn't just a phrase, it's the final act.